The fundamental purpose of the AFL draft is to maintain an equal competition, where every team has a shot at success. Its function is to distribute players across the competition so that top talent goes to the weaker teams. In theory, each team gets one selection each round, but in recent history this has almost never been the case, and the draft has begun to attract scrutiny for its ability to keep the competition even. While a large portion of this pick movement is self-inflicted, as clubs trade current and future selections, academy and father-son selections are playing a prominent role in top-end draft picks going to strong sides, leaving fans down the bottom of the ladder frustrated they don't always have access to the best talent available. In this video, we'll explain how the Next Generation Academies, Northern Academies and the father-son rule work, and investigate how they're impacting the national draft and the overall fairness of the league. First, the Next Generation Academies, or NGAs, are aimed at the attraction and retention of players from Indigenous and multicultural backgrounds. They achieve this by dividing up the country into recruitment zones. If a junior player of Indigenous or multicultural heritage lives in a club zone, then they can join that club's academy, and when they graduate, that club gets special access to draft them. Northern Academies are aimed at growing the game in New South Wales and Queensland. Each of the northern clubs have their own recruitment zones and run their own academy programs in these areas, again reaping the benefits on draft night by having priority to recruit the players they developed in their programs. The father-son rule is famously unique to the AFL and has changed over time. As it currently stands, if your father played 100 games for a club, you can nominate that club as your preferred destination on draft night, giving them the opportunity to draft you ahead of other teams. There are some quirks to this. Games played for Fitzroy or South Melbourne count for Brisbane and Sydney respectively, and for the WA and SA teams, games played for certain WAFL and SA NFL clubs also trigger the father-son rule. So do clubs just get exclusive access to these players? Not quite. On draft night, if your club has an academy or father-son player in the draft pool, you don't get them for free. Instead, if another club higher up the draft order wants your player, they will attempt to select them when it's their turn to pick. You then have the opportunity to match that bid using a combination of your own picks that are defined as equal in value by the AFL Draft Index. We go through a more detailed example in our National Draft Explained video. But for now, the important thing to note is that the team with priority gets a 20% discount on the points needed to match the bids in the first round. This creates a situation where NGAs, Northern Academies and the father-son rule all share the same basic issue. They go against the very purpose of the draft. The whole point is that the worst teams get the best players. It's their primary mechanism for rising up the ranks, much more than free agency, which has actually seen the league's best players turn down bigger offers at struggling clubs to play for more successful ones. When you have a system that allows better teams to select better players, there needs to be compelling reasons for doing so. So what then is the logic behind compromising the draft system? To understand that, let's dig a bit deeper into how these systems are working to distribute talent. Debuting in just 2018, there have been 18 NGA selections taken in the national draft to date. The case for these academies' existence is pretty watertight. Indigenous and multicultural players often face barriers to developing their football, and these academies seek to overcome this by giving these kids a pathway to the AFL. The AFL achieves two objectives through this system: attract and retain the best athletes in Australia, and grow the game in these regions and communities. It's not just about ensuring players like Liam Henry and Mac Andrew make it to the AFL, it's just as much about all those other kids in the clinic who have a wonderful time, experience the sport in a structured and healthy way, and contribute to the growth of Australian rules football. The NGAs most notably attracted controversy in 2020, when the Western Bulldogs, fresh off a finals appearance, matched last place Adelaide's bid for Jamari Ukulhagen at pick 1, allowing the Bulldogs to top up their list with the highest rated talent in Australia. Desperate for a key forward, Adelaide were left to settle for Riley Thilthorpe at pick 2. Since then, the league has taken some action here. In 2022, bids on NGA players were limited to outside the top 20, and starting in 2023, bids can only be matched if they fall outside the top 40. This rule change was partly in response to the Jamara situation, but also because the AFL took over functional control of the NGAs due to COVID-related budget cuts in clubland. So as the AFL bears more of the load, the clubs receive less of the power on draft night. It also acknowledges that these academies are already working to develop genuinely good footballers. Isaac Quainer, Mitch Owens, Toby Bedford, and many more are already having a big impact on the AFL, and as the system is still fairly new, there's been a period of working out the fairest way to approach it. The who pays for what discussion is especially important when talking about the Northern Academies, which are a tremendous boost for the 4 Northern clubs. Gold Coast, Brisbane, GWS and Sydney contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to running these programs. Removing draft advantages would likely discourage the clubs from continuing to invest in these programs. Since the first selection in 2013, 38 Northern Academy players have been selected via matched bids in the draft. And this doesn't even include bids that weren't matched, or those who were stashed on rookie lists, of which there are plenty. As opposed to the NGA players, who are split more evenly across the competition, these 38 were only drafted to New South Wales and Queensland. Some notable current players include Tom Green, Harry Himmelberg, Callum Mills, Errol Goulden, Harris Andrews, and Kitty Coleman. In 2023, the Suns have taken the drastic step of trading away pick 4 to stockpile draft points as they eye off 3 academy players expected to go in the first round, headlined by key forward Jed Walter. Again, like the NGAs, the reasoning is sound enough. By running clinics and providing an elite pathway, the Northern clubs are able to grow the game in underrepresented markets and support multi-code players like Isaac Heaney to choose footy over rugby, draft him to the Swans, and hold him up as a homegrown success story for the next 12 years. Unlike the NGAs, there's currently no limit on where these bids can be matched, meaning the Northern clubs could take these players at any point in the draft. So it serves a footy purpose, sure, but is it too lopsided? The Northern clubs would argue, and there's merit to it, that it is harder for them to attract and retain talent than it is in the traditional footballing states. While the AFL has had success in establishing the league as a nationally followed contest, the talent level at grassroots is still catching up. In 2023, a whopping 55% of players on AFL lists are from Victoria, with West Coast and Freo the only teams where Victorians don't make up the majority of the playing group. For comparison, the Eagles, based in a traditionally Aussie rules state, have a contingent of 27 Western Australians, compared to the Giants, who have only 11 from New South Wales and the ACT. So, as Go Home factor continues to dominate trade and free agency headlines, it's seen as increasingly important that the Northern clubs are given direct access to local talent. There has been a fear that the Northern clubs would become so dominant because of their academies and cost of living allowances that they'd take over the league, and other clubs lobbied for the reduction of the Giants zone in 2017, which saw them lose access to the Riverina region. But this, so far, has been unfounded. Since 2006, non-Victorian clubs have won just 2 of the past 17 premierships, and consequently, none of the Northern clubs have won a flag in the academy era, although 3 have played in losing grand finals. The ultimate fuel to club tribalism, the father-son rule may serve a romantic purpose, but not a football one. After all, the sons of former players are hardly underrepresented at AFL level. As the rule currently operates, it disproportionately benefits the Victorian clubs. Since a draft was introduced in 1986, there have been 113 father-son selections taken, with only 25 of those going to interstate clubs. These stats also miss players like Mark Murphy, who chose not to nominate for the Brisbane Lions in favour of being taken by the Blues with pick 1, and Joe Danaher, who chose Essendon over Sydney. But it's true, not every Victorian club benefits equally either, and the rule is accompanied by an intangible luck stat. Take Geelong and St Kilda for instance, who've had 14 and 3 father-son selections in that time respectively. Some notable names in that Geelong list include Gary and Nathan Ablett, Tom Hawkins and Matthew Scarlett. Not a bad foundation to build a team around. It does seem that the tide may be beginning to turn for interstate clubs though, as they begin to benefit from dads who played games in the AFL era. In 2022, Brisbane matched both North Melbourne's bid for Will Ashcroft with pick 2 and the Bulldogs' bid for Jasper Fletcher at pick 12, giving a team who just lost a prelim 2 selections in the top dozen. Despite the disparity it creates, the father-son rule will likely stay in place, allowing newer clubs to one day see the benefit of it. It would be an incredible disadvantage to give Collingwood the Dacos brothers and the Bulldogs Liberatore, and then shut it down so the Suns miss out on Jared Harbrowse Jr., and Freo fans already joke about having a batch of Pavs in purple. And at the end of the day, it's a unique feature of the AFL, and fans can appreciate the romance of it despite the imbalance. So, the NGAs and the Northern Academies help grow the game, and widen its audience. The father-son rule is blatantly unfair, but entrenched in history, and will likely even out over time. Each individual piece of the system feels justifiable in its own right, but when you combine them all together, and toss in the wild cards of priority picks and free agency compensation picks, the draft is becoming less about where your team finishes, and more about who has an ace up their sleeve on draft night. It feels like we haven't had a top 10 that wasn't compromised in some way in several years. What then, if anything, should be done? Well, NGA exclusivity no longer existing in the top 40 largely negates any serious impact from that system on the draft order. A logical next place to look is how the bidding system works, and more specifically, the 20% draft value discount applied to bids matched in the first round on father-son and academy selections. It makes little sense that a club can jump up the order and be given a discount to do so, especially in the case of father-son selections, where unlike an academy, the club has not necessarily been actively involved in the player's development. If you want one of these players, you should be ready to pay their value to draft them. It's likely this would see more bids go unmatched, more players in the open draft pool, and allow the draft to do what it does best: help bad teams to get better. As a whole, it feels as though we're left with 2 options. We acknowledge that with so many systems now working in opposition to each other, a truly equal system may require a full rethink of the recruiting policy. It's gotten to the point where throwing another patch on an already taped up ship isn't going to fix the underlying problems. Or alternatively, we acknowledge that a little bit of bias here and there can actually be good for the game overall. These systems might not always be fair, but they work to grow the sport of Australian football, its talent base, its audience, and engage the fans across generations. Perhaps some losses at the draft here and there are the small price to pay for a better overall footballing product. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.